and stealth warfare. Following that, a small part of my work, it tends to be blown up by the press, but a small part of my work was to question captured spies during the Cold War who were involved in stealth microwave warfare. Microwaves were then, as are now, used as weapons. May I say in my defence, please, when I question spies and other interesting people, I never used pain, humiliation, embarrassment, hypnosis, drugs. I treated the ladies and gentlemen as I would treat any lady or gentleman. Then I went on to teach. I used to teach advanced physics, both theoretical and experimental, to 17, 18-year-olds with mathematics and human physiology. I was approached 12 years ago by the chief of a police union. And he telephoned me at home and he said, "Hello Barry, you're a physicist, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "We've got this new TETRA system coming in. We can't understand a word of the simple explanatory document that we've been given to approve it. Would you read it for us and tell us what it's about?" And I said, "Certainly." And I read the document and I said, "Under no circumstances should you use this system. It is dangerous on two different fronts. First, the pulse frequency is a known weapon frequency, and the power that you are exposed to, especially the police ladies and the other emergency services, is particularly dangerous." He took me to London with some of his other officers. We had a big meeting in London. They asked me to write a report, which I did free of charge. I always work free of charge. I wrote a report for them called the Confidential Report on the TETRA Airwave Communication System, which is now on the internet. It was peer-reviewed, published, and it's now on the internet. It was released with all of the warnings which I gave. 7 years later, when a lot of the cancers had occurred, which I will come to later, I was approached by a different union, a much larger union, and they said, "Can we commission you to write a higher confidential report on an update on the TETRA communication system?" And I said, "With pleasure." I was ignored with the first report. The government overruled everything that the officers wanted, and I'll come to that in a second. And I wrote the second the higher confidential report. So that is just roughly a little bit of my background. Since then, I seem to be sometimes, I think, the only person in the world that somebody will ring up or write to or talk to concerning this sort of problem. I can receive up to 1,000 communications a week from all over the world to do with this. And whenever I visit a country, and I visit lots, whatever the topic, it always seems to come around in the end to somebody from the emergency services saying, "Can you explain this about the TETRA system?" So I'm going to explain this about the TETRA system now. The scientists here, and I know there are some incredibly prestigious and clever people here, if they will forgive me, I will not talk science. I will happily have a cup of coffee with you whilst I'm here and talk as much science as you wish, but I'd like to keep my talks simple. Now, all of this stems from one piece of paper, and I maintain this is probably the most damaging and dangerous piece of paper ever to have been written. And I think it's going to cause more suffering and more death than any other event in human history. This is or was, till I got hold of it, a confidential document by the US Defense Intelligence Agency. And knowing that microwave communication systems caused cancer and all sorts of neurological and physiological illnesses, the cause wasn't fully understood, but the illnesses were, and the microwaves were. It was the middle bit that needed filling in. They produced a document that was circulated to all Western governments. And it said, and I will quote it exactly, "If the more advanced nations of the West are strict in the enforcement of stringent exposure standards, there could be unfavorable effects on industrial output and military functions. Personnel exposed to microwave radiation below thermal levels," which of course is TETRA, and then they list a whole dossier of illnesses, both physiological and neurological, which you can develop from low-level microwave irradiation. I know you can't read these where you're sitting. I have told the people running this conference that I will make all of my papers available to anybody who wants them, as far as I'm concerned, free of charge.
May I ask one question, just to get some information? The TETRA system, which is the frequency, and is it pulses or is it...
Can I come to that later?
You will come to it, yes, yes, okay.
Thank you. And one of the things at the end of this, it just says that if the blood-brain barrier is affected, and now scientifically there are experiments that show the blood-brain barrier, which isn't just around the brain, it's also around the thorax and the abdomen. If that leaks, it says, as a result, the individual could develop severe neuropathological symptoms, either die or become seriously impaired neurologically. Now, when that document came out, so I'm just really giving you just a bit of the basic history here. When the document came out, we then had two different types of safety level. We had the safety level where countries or scientists from countries observed the interaction of the microwaves with the cellular processes. In other words, seeing how all of the cellular processes, the signal transduction, cell potential, how everything was changed. So we had that level, and we had the level which was set by most of the Western governments and is still in force today and still is in force for TETRA, and that is 6 minutes of warming. Now the difference between the two, if we look at some of the countries who look at the interaction between the electric and the magnetic vector and the cellular processes, most of them are in single units. They start with 1 unit. I won't worry about what the units are. They start with 1 unit and they go up to around 10 units. With the TETRA system, it goes up to 10,000 units, although it has been increased recently. Now, to put this into perspective, if you went to a doctor, or 2 doctors, and one doctor said, you must not have any more than 10 of these tablets. And another doctor said, you can have 10,000 of these tablets. Somebody has to be wrong, clearly. So this is the difference between the thermal safety level and the non-thermal safety level. Now, the document I wrote, I'm coming straight to the document I wrote 7 years ago, not 7 years ago, 2009, 3 years ago, the highly confidential report, which you can have a copy if you wish. The government, the English government, and you will notice I'm quoting here mostly English government scientists' work or other government scientists' work. I'm not quoting my own work. The English government scientists concerning TETRA, they wrote that they will not exclude a risk. TETRA is actually a medical trial. It is an experiment. Whether you were told that when you signed up along with the other 150 countries to take it, TETRA is a medical experiment which does not finish until 2018. They have said concerning TETRA, that the scientists, do not exclude a risk of cancer many years after first exposure, nor do they rule out a hazard from the modulation frequency of approximately 16 waves a second, 16 hertz. Human volunteer studies should be carried out to measure changes in cognitive performance. This will be of value for any future epidemiological study. The board, this is the government, the board welcomes the research programme that the Home Office, the English Home Office, has established. This includes an epidemiological study on police officers who are occupationally exposed to TETRA signals. Until much more information becomes available, users of TETRA, it is believed, should practice a precautionary approach. Now, I'm not sure what precautionary approach means if you're in the emergency services and you are in an emergency situation. So what they've actually said here, basically, is that TETRA is a trial. It is a medical trial and a medical study on police officers. When a new chief took over the Police Federation, my report was dismissed as utter and total rubbish. My first report was dismissed as utter and total rubbish, and they denied that I existed. And I went to the meeting, the TETRA airwave meeting, where the police unions met the new federation chairperson, a lady called Jan Barrie. And she came out and she said, her opening words were, "Nothing is going to stop TETRA." Those were her opening words. Nothing is going to stop TETRA. Some of the police officers raised questions already about ill health with their officers, both neurological ill health and physiological ill health. The Home Office doctor, Muriel Levy, she gave them an option, and her exact words were, "They use it or resign." That is it. So you are on a medical trial, which they say can cause cancer and neurological disorder. And your choice is to either use it or resign. Now, there is a document which I referenced in my report, because I believe that saying to somebody, a professional person, saying to a professional person, use it or resign, a lot of the ladies and gentlemen of the emergency services, they have families, their children are at schools, they have bills, mortgages. It's not easy to resign and give all that up. Even if you are thinking, I'm going to run the risk of cancer or neurological damage, it's a difficult decision, I would think, to think, well, do I keep my family stable and run the risk, or do I resign and get another job? But I have maintained ever since she said that this statement she made was actually illegal, insofar as the experiment is not due to finish until 2018. And in her address, Muriel Levy, when she said they can resign, she also said, I don't believe, when officers put their hands up and said, you know, we have officers who are sick, she said, I don't believe they're sick. Neuropatterns which could lead to behavioural and character changes. One of the things I'm familiar with, was when I was discussing in conversation with agents in the Cold War. It was known then, and I have a list here of probably 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, probably 15 different pulse frequencies which were used as stealth weapons. Microwaves were used as they are today as stealth weapons, because it is a perfect weapon. You don't know it's coming at you, you can't feel it until you start feeling ill. And a series of pulse frequencies were put in which would react with the circadian cyclotronic rhythms, the body's natural rhythms, the natural brainwave frequencies. There are lots of different pulse frequencies you can put in. They're not sick enough to stop this trial. Now, I believe that is not legal because of this document here, which is the Nuremberg Code, a directive on any human experimentation. And the Nuremberg Code specifically says the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent. Before acceptance, subjects there should be made known to him the nature, duration and purpose of the experiment, method and means by which it is to be conducted, hazards to be expected upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment. And you have the absolute right to say no. Now, I may be stupid, but I think one person standing up saying use it or resign does not give individual consent to 100,000 emergency service personnel. This, a few years later, Tuesday the 1st of March 2005, illnesses in police officers and families. Because if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, TETRA is everywhere. It isn't just what you carry. You have these incredibly powerful transmitters, and they can have a range of 50 kilometers. And usually around some fire stations, ambulance stations, police stations, you may have what we call married quarters, where you have housing for the people, or they live close, in which case they are getting quite a hefty dose day and night of the TETRA frequencies. Now, on the 1st of March 2005, the English Parliament brought up TETRA, and their objections were, and this is from the English Parliament, there was no consultation at all with the families or the officers with the experiment that they were exposed to. Information was withheld from members of Parliament concerning this. £30,000 had been requested to study the effects on children living near the system. They asked why research was not done before the system was employed to show it would be safe. They raised concerns from the police constabularies of cases of illness. 58.5% of residents around the transmitters, these are families, complained of pain, skin problems, sleep problems, other health problems. 58%. It said the TETRA industry had shown complete disregard for the concerns, or for anybody's concerns. And they also accused the industry of not telling the truth. One of the reasons why TETRA was actually forced out, it never went to tender. The European Union actually deemed the TETRA contract as illegal. TETRA was forced out, and the officers that I have had in absolute tears in my house, complaining of tumours and other illnesses, they all seem to tell the same story, is that when they take this up with the Police Federation or their chief officers, they are either victimised, threatened, told to go and see their own doctors and keep it confidential like any other matter. And I could not understand why an organisation like the Police Federation, representing the officers, highly paid to represent the officers, would not challenge this. And one of the answers may be, this is a document published on the 17th of April 2003. And it says that TETRA, all of the gubbins inside TETRA, is made by Motorola. And Motorola is an American firm. It also says that the encryption keys for any Motorola system must be handed to the US government, where they lock them in a safe. and the US government, I have no doubt, will say they do not look at them. But this document said it is possible. It is possible the American Secret Service agency has the ability to intercept all TETRA airwave communications. I do know that I was invited to have dinner with a chief of police in Holland who was very worried about the Americans, because TETRA isn't just emergency services. There can be up to 50 different organizations in 150 countries using it. The secret services, the coast guards, the special operations people. And he said, I'll tell you one thing that really worries me, Barrie. He said, we have quite a drugs problem here. And he said, we can be 2 to 3 years studying and watching to make one big drugs boost, one big arrest. He said, now supposing you had somebody who had access to these codes in the United States, they can listen to every single thing we are saying all of the time. And he said, supposing you had an American person, high up, who is linked to organized crime. They only have to listen to this message, and this is theoretical, tip off the organized crime, and we have lost 2 to 3 years of very, very expensive work. And he said, that is my worry. Now, one of the problems with TETRA is its pulse frequency.
Excuse me, is it possible to document on that fact you gave us just now?
I've referenced it in my document here.
Could you give it to us?
Of course.
Is it possible to do that?
Of course.
Thank you. I'll contact you afterwards.
I won't, I'll have to get it photocopied. The TETRA frequency, the TETRA pulse frequency, has been the cause of much controversy ever since TETRA came out. Around 17 cycles a second, the Radiation Health Foundation wrote, which specifically targets the TETRA frequency of approximately 17.6 Hertz. It says it could cause harm to the health of the police officer, other citizens by causing irreversible brain damage by disturbing the calcium in the brain. It can affect memory, neural patterns, which could lead to behavioural and character changes. One of the things I'm familiar with, was when I was discussing in conversation with agents in the Cold War. It was known then, and I have a list here of probably 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, probably 15 different pulse frequencies which were used as stealth weapons. Microwaves were used as they are today as stealth weapons, because it is a perfect weapon. You don't know it's coming at you, you can't feel it until you start feeling ill. And a series of pulse frequencies were put in which would react with the circadian, cyclotronic rhythms, the body's natural rhythms, the natural brainwave frequencies. There are lots of different pulse frequencies you can put in. Probably 20 going back a few years now, which could cause 30 to 40 different ailments depending on your state of health and other things. Today the list, I am informed, is in excess of 600, whereby microwave beams can also stimulate the release of certain brain chemicals that I won't go into publicly now, and you can actually do combinations of pulse frequencies and chemicals. It's immensely complex. But I have a list here of, say, 20. TETRA falls in the category of, and you wouldn't believe this for the emergency services, the pulse frequency, it can induce the inability to make decisions, which is the last thing you want the emergency services people to do in a life and death situation. Sensory problems, that comes from the calcium efflux, which can affect all of the senses. Okay. The problem of cancer, I will just say one thing here. At the time, the government's chief scientist, a Scottish gentleman, incredibly clever and incredibly admired. I've never heard anybody say anything bad about this gentleman. Sir William Stewart, the government's chief scientific officer. He's now retired. He found that the TETRA frequency can release calcium from brain tissue. And the experts here on brains will certainly know that the last thing you want is calcium efflux or extra calcium going into the brain. The Police Federation in 2008, the people I wrote the initial report for, and I said this was going to happen in 2001 when my paper had been peer-reviewed and published. In 2008, they made a statement which said that they now realised the system was potentially dangerous, but it was too late to do anything about it. This triggered the International Association of Firefighters. The International Association of Firefighters were concerned because with the TETRA masts they tended to put them on top of the towers. The fire service have these towers that they can climb up with their ladders and rescue ladies from the top in their 90s and carry them down again. But the TETRA transmitters were put on top, and when they were put on top, they were not allowed to use the towers. And the fire brigade, the International Fire Brigade, looked into this, and they decided to do their own thorough investigative study. Now, you can say what you like about all of the government scientists and everybody else, but I think the International Association of Firefighters, they are not stupid people. They are very matter of fact, we won't take any nonsense from anybody people. I wrote to them and offered my help, and they said, no thank you, we will do this on our own without help. Brilliant. And their conclusion, I think it was about 250 something pages, their report. Their conclusion was, many firefighters living with cell towers are paying a substantial price in terms of physical and mental health. That is their conclusion. Straightforward and simple. I was worried about the number of cancers. I can remember 2 Christmases ago in November, I had 5 lady police officers, all on separate occasions, crying in my front room with tumours of the neck and breast tumours. And I'm going to cover breast tumours in a talk tomorrow or Saturday, because it's a big topic and there's a lot of research I want to go into. But they had breast tumours or cancer of the neck. And they again told me the same story. One of them was a lady dog handler and her husband was a dog handler. And she said, I went to my chief officer and said, you know, I now have a tumour. And she was told point blank, he said, if you make a fuss about this, we will move you over there. We will move your husband over there. Which one of you has the children, we don't know. Go to your doctor and don't make a fuss. And she said that was what she was told. And that is a very familiar story. An article came out by the successor to Sir William Stewart, Professor Laurie Challis. I met him, I've met him a couple of times. I was at a conference and I approached him and I said, you realise that TETRA is going to cause a lot of illness to a lot of people who do not know they're being experimented on. You are experimenting upon people without their knowledge and without their consent, and this can cause untold devastation and suffering for the family. And he looked me straight in the eyes and said, what's wrong with that? Those were his exact words. What's wrong with that? Now, he also wrote a paper, a mathematical paper. It was published in Scientific American, on the likelihood of getting cancer from microwaves penetrating the brain. And his conclusion was, and I don't have the figures here, it was a something percent something of a probability of something that was almost incomprehensible to read. And I teach advanced mathematics and it was almost incomprehensible to read. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go to town on this document and I'm going to find out exactly what the probability is of the police officers of the United Kingdom developing cancer. We're not talking soft tissue cancers quickly, we're talking the gliomas, the 20 to 30 year latency period, almost incurable cancers. Which, if you think about it, is really rather naughty, because you have an officer who is absolutely loyal, serving you, serving the people, 20, 30 years, happy retirement, zonk, tumour. It's I mean, my brain can't actually think of a word for somebody who will do that. So I went to town on these figures, and I was astounded at the result. So I went to a mathematician who is better than I, and a statistician, a doctor. And I said, would you please check my figures? And she went over them. And she said, no. She said, this is all right to me, Barry. You sort of laid it all out. And when I wrote this in 2009, we had a potential 7,630 officers who could have slow-growing tumours. Now, not everybody will develop slow-growing tumours. That is, according to the professor's mathematics, the number you could expect. It won't be everybody, and you never will get everybody. And this is one of the things I get thrown at me. People jump up and they say, aha, we've done an experiment which shows everybody is safe. Or we've done an experiment that shows this doesn't work. And you will have that, and you have to have that. It's called a distribution curve for the mathematicians here. If you study trees, fish, frogs, people, anything, you will always get a distribution curve. And to explain it, if I went now to your local airport and I picked out the first 10,000, the end of the reaction is what we call a free radical, which is also a cancer-causing agent. Neurobehavioral effects I've covered, nerve damage, and of course EEG disruption. Now I want to talk about women. I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. I want to talk about women briefly because my biggest concern, without being disrespectful to the gentleman, it's known from many experiments that 4.15 more women become ill from microwaves than men. But there is one thing which worries me enormously, and that is the ladies of the emergency services and school children, which I will deal with in tomorrow's talk. And I studied 400 research papers, and I turned them into a cartoon, which is obviously nothing funny about it, but a cartoon because people can understand cartoons, they can look at these. I turned them into a cartoon, particularly for women, because a lot of women tend to carry the TETRA sets sort of on their belts or over their breast. Now, I'd like you to imagine, so I just need some water here. We're doing okay for time. I'd like you to imagine that all of you are young 18-year-old police women, and you are carrying a TETRA set. Your ovaries, which have all of the eggs, which if you become pregnant will develop obviously into the embryo and the fetus. Your ovaries are being permanently, almost permanently, irradiated. Little or very few scientists appreciate that the ovarian DNA is actually 10 times more susceptible to radiation than ordinary DNA. So you are walking around as a young lady for however many years having your ovaries irradiated. If you become pregnant, there is a risk, which I will go into tomorrow or Saturday, there is a risk of genetic damage in your child from the irradiated ovaries. And this is the police women or emergency services women now. There is a risk of this. But that isn't the main risk. If you become pregnant, and you may not know you're pregnant for a month or so, if you become pregnant and the embryo inside you is a girl, this takes some following. The embryo inside you is a girl. the eggs that produce that embryo, as I have discussed, may already have been damaged. So you may have a genetically damaged child there. But if we look at the embryo, and we'll assume it's a girl, the first 100 days of the embryo's existence, you have the formation of the 400,000 follicles which are producing the eggs that the baby will be born with. Your little girl, when you give birth, will be born with these eggs already in situ. So for the first 100 days, they are in the formation process. But they have no protein 53, no nuclear core complex, which are defense mechanisms which we have in and around ourselves to protect us from thunderstorms and electric storms. They have no defense mechanisms. So the eggs inside your little girl are most likely to be damaged. So, you're most kind, thank you so much.
Should I put it up here? Or?
Thank you. If you just put it down, I've got another one there. You're most kind, thank you so much. So the eggs inside your little girl may be very heavily irradiated and there is no defense mechanism. Now you have your child, your little girl, who may or may not have genetic damage. But the real damage, because microwaves will go straight through every cell in the body, it doesn't distinguish. The real damage will be when your little girl grows up, becomes pregnant, and those eggs are then going to produce a child. So in fact, the damage to the lady emergency service workers today is where the most damage we're looking at could be 25 years hence. That is when it's going to come out. And very few people have taken the trouble to study the research on that. And we do know, and it is published by one of the most cleverest gentlemen I think ever to set foot on this planet, Dr. John Goldsmith, who had 19 professorships and was advisor to everybody in the world that you needed advising. He found that at levels lower, radiation levels, microwave levels lower than you would get in a classroom of children with Wi-Fi, or a lady police officer is carrying, produced, it was 57.7% miscarriages. And they were from experiments on women during the Cold War. So I'm particularly worried about women. One of the things, again, that concerns me, and I've always said, in every country I've been in, I've said, please find me a police station that has more than 100 officers, that has had TETRA for 5 years or so, where somebody honest does the research, where you have not had an increase in cancers, not had an increase in illness, not had an increase in police violence towards the public, and not had an increase in vehicle accidents. And one of the documents here, during the London riots that we had a few years ago, I had a telephone call from a senior officer from a police van, and these people are incredibly brave. People can lose their jobs for talking to me. The government really don't like it. And he said, I had a dozen officers in the back of a metal van for hours on end, all transmitting next to each other. Now, there's your 6 minutes, which is the maximum for TETRA anyway, gone. And you're in a metal van, so the microwaves won't escape. It's like being in a microwave oven. And he said to me, he said, Barry, the people that got out of my van were not the people who got in. And it has been measured and documented by a government agency, the Automotive organisation here, that strengths of microwaves inside a police vehicle of 50 volts per metre, which is absolutely horrendous. You really don't want that amount of radiation going into you. Now, I'm not doing too bad, I've got about another 10 minutes here and I'll be okay. I do have friends in high or low places, depending which way you look at this. A very, very prominent senior anonymous government scientist came to me and said, Barry, I am incredibly worried. Okay. He said, I have been asked to complete an experiment, and I've referenced this paper and it is available to look at. He said, I was asked to test the effect of TETRA on the brain and the heart. He said, now, you're an experimental physicist. How long would it take you to test TETRA on the brain and the heart? And I said, well, I would follow basically the same technique that drug companies. I said I would probably have an idea which way I was going in 5 years. By 10 years, I would probably have it written up, ready for peer review. He said, do you know how long they gave me, or us? He said, we had them both finished inside an hour. An hour. He said, and that was 20 minutes over for a cup of coffee. He said, now my conclusion was we found no ill effects from TETRA. And that was all the emergency services got. Top government scientists, no ill effects from TETRA. He said, I can't expose this. He said, I have 2 children at college or university, another one going. I have a mortgage up to my heels. I have a wife that goes shopping almost every day. He said, you know, I can't do anything about this. And I said, I can, give me the paper. And I produced it in this report. Okay. It is not just me talking about this. This is the top, most highly respected police journal in the UK, James. They will not publish a word unless it has been checked and double checked and somebody else has checked it. They won't publish a word. And they spent, I think, something like 6 weeks writing to me every day saying, send proof of this, proof of this, proof of this. And all these documents are in fact, they will be available to you. Let's take away. The article, this was on the G20 riots, where the police were excessively violent. When I said they jumped out of the back of the van and they were not the people who got in, they were excessively violent. One officer was charged with murder or manslaughter. On camera, he was seen violently attacking a person to the ground, and this person died, and he was sentenced to court on a charge of murder or manslaughter, I'm not sure. And this is to do with the riots. TETRA did airwave radios trigger officers' behaviour in the G20 riot protests. They've actually featured it. They also feature a report of brain tumour risk. They actually say here the radio may face a withdrawal call, and they also do a page on their worry about women's health. Now, I'll finish just very, very quickly. I may overrun just 2 or 3 minutes. Is that okay? When this officer was sentenced to murder, to stand trial for murder, there was nothing in the evidence that TETRA can cause, from one government document, severe aggression. And I thought, well, this is unfair. So I wrote, this is my handwriting, I don't type, I have a fountain pen and a bottle of ink, and that's as far as I go with technology. This is my handwriting. I wrote to the High Court judge saying I believe there could be a miscarriage of justice because not all of the information is being put forward in the officer's defence. He may have been guilty, but he deserves a fair trial, whatever the outcome. And this is my letter. It's a very lengthy letter, runs into several pages. And I said, there are things which have not been put forward in the officer's defence. And the things not put forward in the officer's defence were, he was enclosed within a metal police van for hours, so his brain was entrained. He was close to 4 other officers all transmitting. That ensures that you are well over the level, the safety level. He was wearing a metal-based helmet, so the microwaves had no escape. All they could do was oscillate around the skull. And he was using the system for more than 6 minutes. I had a letter from the officer's solicitor and said, send me your evidence. I sent it. I had another letter from the officer's solicitor saying, thank you very much. He checked the evidence. It obviously seemed okay. There was no problem. And he said, I'm forwarding it to counsel for trial. And then the most amazing thing happened, which the country is still trying to work out. And there are 2 explanations. The officer was found not guilty before TETRA could be introduced to the trial. Now, either he was not guilty and there was no need to bring it to the trial, and that is fine, and that is justice. Or TETRA was deliberately kept out of the trial. But he was found not guilty. And there is quite a lot going on at the moment to look into this. In one of the research papers, which I quoted in my letter to the judge, the government scientists do send out work to other universities who are very, very pleased to get the money to do research, and a university was asked to do research on TETRA. But when you get hold of these papers, they used a continuous wave, not a pulsed wave, which is where most of the trouble stems, and it was a short-term exposure. And their conclusion was that no ill effect was found from TETRA. Okay, there wouldn't be with a continuous wave for short-term exposure. But then in the back, they quote another research paper which they are obliged to do. In the small print at the back, it says, from a previous experiment, in every group, some participants were significantly affected. This was in relation to an experiment where pulses were used, which is what, of course, you use. The cancers haven't stopped. Article here, 2 policemen using TETRA die from cancer. They are blaming the system, and a whole series of other illnesses still going on. I had a telephone call just 2 weeks ago from a police officer in one country, and he said, Barry, he said, we're getting a really strange phenomena here. Our officers carry the TETRA sets on their lapels, and they bend forward to speak in the lapels, and the antenna is of course level with the eye. And they said, we are getting officers, in the plural, I don't know how many, developing eye cancer. What can we do about it? And I said, well, it is known. It is known microwaves will cause eye cancer. It's been published. And if you think about it, microwaves go for moisture, and the eyes are, of course, very, very moist. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm only a minute or two over, something which I'm very, very upset about. There are new TETRA gadgets coming out all of the time, with the gentleman's question, 380 to 400 megahertz. New TETRA gadgets coming on all of the time. This one, I cannot, for the life of me, I would give anything to see the research paper on this. It is known, there are research papers, which I may come into over the weekend, where microwaves have been shown to change bone density. They have also been shown to change the bone marrow structure, because the marrow structure in the long bones is particularly moist. And this particular adaptation is for, and it's for TETRA, again by Motorola, and it's to send signals in noisy conditions through officers' bones via an earpiece. So presumably and I haven't seen the paper on this, that the waves are going to go into the skull, vibrate the skull, which of course will actually react with other bones connected to the skull. You're going to send messages into the brain via physical vibrating bones. Now, that horrifies me, it absolutely horrifies me. When you look at the intricacies and what's going on, and I haven't seen the research paper, but I would love to see the research paper where they say, you know, no ill effect has been found, or this cannot possibly cause any damage. I'm particularly upset about this system because what upsets me is the fact that officers are being experimented upon, the fact that lady officers are going to possibly have genetically deformed children and their children, and we have sold this to in excess of 150 countries. And I wonder, I have no knowledge, I wonder whether the countries, like this country, whether you have been told this. This is nothing to do with me. What I've given you is the fire brigade research, the police unions research, the government research. There's nothing of mine here. Government scientists research. This is just government knowledge, which they all have, and I would like to think that they came to Norway and said, we want to sell you the TETRA system. Here are all the problems that we have. Hopefully you will discuss it with all of your members and you will buy the system. I would like to think that took place. Maybe it didn't, but this is what worries me, is that I am receiving messages from other countries with problems that they shouldn't have because they were foreseen. And there may even be immense legal claims and ramifications here. I don't know. But may I thank you for your courtesy.
So much. It's really interesting. It's really scary to think about.
It is scary.
And I think it sometimes might be too difficult to sort of take it in because it's too scary and it can't be that evil. That's how I think about it. And but we have to face the world that is the other side of it. So thank you very much
My pleasure.
for coming here. And we'll now welcome also Kjell Fløkkøy. He's been studying this topic with trying to get into the information about the health problems with TETRA for the people using the equipment, and also the people that are exposed to this radiation in their houses. So I would like him to have a little comment on your presentation first.
Absolutely.
So welcome up and up here.
Oh, that's a bit.
You have bad knees or something? A little comment on what you heard in this presentation, and then it's open for questions from the audience.
It would be hope to one that, well, thank you for the address, and also open the discussion to be on the floor with the rest of the gang. But I must humbly accept the invitation to this high level. Thank you. Well, this late hour poses some limits to our depth and extent of our discussion, I think. So,
There's a mic, please.
well, you don't hear me. You want me to repeat all the beautiful words I said? Thank you. Thank you. No. My task is just to open a discussion. And to me, the topics are too large and too important to go into at depth and breadth. So let me just point out some of the main features of your talk. It seems to me that there are three main points. One is the danger related to the 17 Hertz factor. The second one is TETRA as an experiment. And the third is TETRA as a listening device for Motorola and the United States. Those come in a group. And then there is a whole set of very important topics that you addresses, which I think is beyond the scope of this discussion. It was sufficient to say that with respect to published literature, it is some problems in documenting the claims you are presenting up here. There might well still, though, be truths in them. And you are completely right in warning us, every one of us, for the potential danger that can be connected to to microwaves, and probably especially the pulsed microwaves. You are making very high claims about the 17 and TETRA as an experiment and TETRA as a listening device. And I'm glad to hear that you are also prepared to show the evidence for that. The first question is this: what do you base the 17 hertz danger on? You were mentioning several frequencies, and that you will find in the literature too. And you also find that different people are sensitive to different frequencies.
Yes, I
Some to around 17, some to around 20 and up,
Yep.
some below. So there is an individual difference.
But this was the distribution curve, was it?
Oh, I see. Okay. With respect to TETRA as an experiment, I first thought that you meant to say that TETRA is a technical device that different nations have decided to use as a technology for transmitting data. But as you presented it, it seems that you are also thinking of TETRA as a kind of a biological experiment. And I expect that you will have evidence to support that claim. And thirdly, and not the least important, if TETRA is actually a listening device, then that would withdraw the carpet, so to say. I mean, it would destroy the selling potential of that technology across the world. Because if that was actually true, the whole selling process would collapse. So I expect that you also have support for that claim. So these three things are my main introductory comments, actually. There is to stress the 17 hertz frequency, modulating frequency, to think that is a very dangerous frequency. You have to have a lot of support for that.
The chief governments, yeah, as I say, the chief government, Sir William Stewart, and other scientists, far more superior to me, warned about the system. And it is they I am quoting, particularly Sir William Stewart. The documentary evidence, everything I've said is actually in my higher confidential report, and the union which published it, they insisted on every single document which I referenced or which I used, and I've said basically what I've said this evening is that report. The union insisted on verifying every single document that went into quite a few pages, and they checked the documents, they peer-reviewed the whole paper for quite a while, and then they sent it to the countries that they believe are now worried about this system. And I do agree with you, sir. It is a horrific prognosis And I would really love to believe I am wrong. I'd love to believe I'm wrong. But I'm quoting the top government scientists, the top laboratories, the fire brigades, International Fire Brigade Unit. I'm quoting people who are far more clever than I could ever wish to be. And I'm doing this because a chief officer came to me and said, would you represent us with TETRA? This was the initial officer, would you read this and represent us? And at the moment he hasn't said stop, and I'm still representing them. But as I said, every single thing I've said is documented. It is with the union, and I'm pretty sure that their solicitors would have gone over this with a fine-tooth comb. And I know it was cleared. I know it was sent out because I had a call from New Zealand where they're worried about it. But I'm only quoting sort of people of your stature, the professors, and I'm quoting the things that the ordinary officer would not have access to, and maybe would not understand.
I think we open up for questions from the audience as well.
Sir, you mentioned Nuremberg Code, but you did not mention that, I think it was 1997, the European Union arranged a meeting with European countries where research, forskning, is allowed without consent. They use the word research, and you can research the whole population without consent, which is extremely bad, and this is one of the things that probably has something to do with TETRA.
Sorry, can I just mention there, the only thing I know with that, and I haven't read that, but I do know that in the Nuremberg Code, the only research that can be done without consent is if a doctor chooses to research on Section 5, his or herself. That may be done, and as far as I know, it's only been done once. But if you're saying to me that any industry can do any research which can result in death or brain damage on any person in the world.
The vocabulary was not the way you say it, but the vocabulary which I have read did say that research is allowed in European Union. Of course, it is the whole world. I read it myself.
Yeah, okay.
But another thing, you said about TETRA that it can, change behavior. To me, that can be said that it is a mind control device just as well.
Oh, the pulse frequency, it could be. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I'm still worried about this. Could you just explain for me, please? You can study people worldwide without consent. I mean, might that be studying people like if you walk into the cafeteria downstairs and you're counting how many people have milk in their coffee, or how many people are with other partners, or some sort of harmless study?
No,
or
health studies.
Okay, health study. Well, could it be the number of people that... So I will come to you, sir.
No, I was going to answer as well.
Would it be the number of people who catch cold at school or develop illnesses at school if they've not been inoculated? I'm finding it very, very hard to think that a law has been passed which can allow an industry to experiment on somebody where they say we cannot rule out the possibility of cancer or brain damage.
You should try and read the whole thing.
Okay.
Sorry.
Stephen.
So just one comment. If you could just find the document and tell us what it is.
I just read it very, very.
I used to work in clinical trials. I was running multi-center trials all across Europe and America at that time.
Yeah, it
And
was in
GCP,
Strasbourg,
GOP.
1997.
Yeah, I was
And
doing it in
European
1999.
countries decided, I don't know if it's the
Then you
law
must
or
find the
whatever,
document and get it clear. Because it's a very
but
important point.
research is research, and you can do just about anything with research, which is
Right.
very,
That was
very.
my job.
Okay. The best would be don't make the discussion out to this document. It would be really great if we could have the reference to it and we can look into it because it can be an important document in this discussion. Stephen, you had another
I had a
question.
whole bunch of questions, I'll just get one in now. You said the TETRA is an experiment. Who's experimenting? What's the point of the experiment?
It's an epidemiological experiment, as far as I can tell, to test the pulse frequency and the strength of the microwaves on young, fit service personnel.
So, I thought you were using sort of an analogy, it's as if it was an experiment, but you mean somebody is purposely putting in TETRA all over the place as a big...
Oh yes, and that's not new. When I was in the forces in the 60s, a document came around and said, would anybody like a free weekend in London, all expenses paid, to test flu injections from the English government scientists. This was, I think, 61, 62, and 20,000 people volunteered, and it was only a few years ago, 50 years on, that they found they were nothing to do with flu injections. They were all sorts of biochemical devices, all sorts of concoctions that were dreamed up by Porton Down, and a lot of people died. And when it got to court a few years ago, the survivors were paid compensation, but then, I mean, in the 60s, they're willing to experiment on 20,000 young, fit service personnel just to see what these injections would do. Because they like service personnel, because your work routine it's known, your health is monitored, you're all roughly young and fit. They make ideal subjects for human experimentation, and I can assure you, sir, that isn't the only one. Over many countries, and I'll come to this I think on Saturday, over 500,000 people have been experimented on.
And it's also a cheap weapon compared to other things that you may develop.
You kill your own police forces, they're the wrong people to kill.
Exactly.
I mean, it's crazy, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Okay, jag tror det var där den här.
Yes, there is a big difference between experimenting on someone and doing research.
I agree.
Because if you expose someone to something and gathering information is two different things. Very different.
Okay.
Some technicians' information. I'm working with installation TETRA in police cars every day, and we have meet and have documentation. A lot of documentation that we have a very high level of disturbing from the TETRA net. And the level is very high, and the reason for that is the 7.6 pulse frequency is put in the TDMA modulation system, you know, so you have access 4 times, so you have a very, very high level of the wave, and this wave can be danger. And we can meet them, and we can feel them, and we can see them. They disturb the speed equipment in the police car. They disturb another communications radio. And why don't your brain is an isotropic antenna? They take up this microwave from the beta frequency.
Well, the brain will take it up.
Yeah. Because your brain, it's an isotropic antenna, you know.
Oh yes, the brain will take it up. And it is known, and it is published. And as I say, the country's top scientist, Sir William Stewart, he said, you will have calcium efflux. And calcium, as you might well know, sir, you do not want excess calcium in the brain because it can trigger the senses. It can trigger the senses into overstimulation and give false readings.
For de som ikke kjenner denne personen som han snakker om, så er det da lederen i Health Protection Agency i England, så det er virkelig en person å stole på når han refererer til Sir William Stewart. Jeg tror det var... Ja, ok.
My name is Olaf Linde. I'm leader of the firefighter union here in Oslo, and this is maybe a strange question, but my concern is I want an emergency net that works. Does it work as bad as in Oslo, in your country, in England? We have really big problems with the net working as well.
The problem
how can Motorola go around the world and sell things that doesn't work inside the building? You shouldn't be discussing healthcare. You should discuss the net that doesn't work. How do they do this?
The simple answer is the officers haven't told me whether it works or not. I tend to get the telephone calls when it is too late and they've developed cancer, or they want to know if they can take some form of legal action, or they want to know why their union isn't defending them. I don't get the operational... It may be the best system in the world for all I know. I don't know, but
I also have another concern. I have 5 feet planted on the earth, and I think the strange thing is that the same things that the fire chiefs and the police chiefs in England says is now being said by fire chiefs in north of Norway. Getting the TETRA net in 2015.
Yeah.
They haven't seen it. They haven't been visiting us. And it's the same arguments going around. How could it be? Where is the money? Who is earning money on this?
well, I mean, to be honest, the people I have spoken to, and this is only the people I've spoken to, I'm not saying I'm right. I have read this, and I'm trying to think where I read it. I read that, I think it's in that document about the same document that where the keys are given to the American government. There was an article that said President Bush didn't ask, he told my Prime Minister, Tony Blair, get TETRA out. We were told to adopt the TETRA system. Once the British police adopted the TETRA system, the British police are held in high regard, as with other police forces around the world. British police use the TETRA system, isn't it wonderful? Buy it. We recently, TETRA were given the contract for the Olympic Games, which didn't do them any harm. So now it's also being sold as the secure system for the police, the emergency. And it may be money. I have no interest in markets and money and how things are sold. I just know that maybe if you Google TETRA airwave now, it'll be 160, 170 countries. But maybe that they have very, very clever marketing people. It may be that somebody high up in the country is being leaned on, like our Prime Minister, saying, get TETRA in, and if anyone gives you any nonsense, crush them straight away. It may be that system. I don't know, sir. I really don't know. I'm astounded that it's got out as far as it has with all of the cancers. And the first cancer was within 18 months, and it was a doctor's brother, and he wept in my house. He was a motorcyclist, and motorcyclists have it on full power. By his neck, he developed cancer of the throat, and he wasn't the only one in that force to develop cancer of the throat, and he died. And the first death was quite quickly.
Could I please have a
Okay.
following question on the
Okay.
on the strength, because the TETRA net doesn't work indoors in Oslo.
Mhm.
You enter the door and it stops. And the solution from the Motorola company is to build in repeaters in the cars. Who would
Right.
send with 10, 15 watts. What would it do with the people inside the car?
Well, I mean, again, we're looking at the TETRA pulse frequency, and ordinary safety says you should never use your cell phone inside a car, anyway, because of the metal. It reflects it. But if I were sitting where you were sitting, I would want a copy of what I've got here. I would insist on seeing the safety reports on the TETRA airwave system.
They removed it from the box before we got the radio, so...
But I would insist on, you know, I mean, these are, I will come to you, sir. These are, it is your life and your lady police officers and their children. It's not going to affect me. I'm going to be dead long before anything's going to happen to you or these children. No one's going to come back to me and say thank you very much. I won't be around. You know, you have got to pick this up and think, do I want to do something about this? You're welcome to get your unions together and come over to my house and drink all my beer and have chocolate biscuits and fire all the questions you like at me and film it. You're welcome to do that.
But that is exactly that is exactly the experiment, the character experiment. They don't know what is going to happen when you put it into the car. Lots of
Yes.
things like that. That is the experiment.
Det er mange spørsmål nå, men det var deg først.
Could you recommend any good alternative for the TETRA system?
If I did, sir, it would be without having tried it. I do know that there, and if I did, I would instantly be accused of working for that company. I can assure you, people hate me so much. I only have to do one thing, and they're down on me like a ton of bricks. There are systems. I mean, you have a community. You have community. There must be police forces, as I know there are, that have other microwave-based systems, and they can be made relatively safe, that do not use this pulse frequency. I know that they exist, and I do know that they do not have the health problems. So there are alternative systems, and it's the question that has always vexed me is when there are systems which are safe, and you write in the government scientists write, we cannot rule out cancer or brain damage. Why try? Why not just get a system you know is safe, you know works? A skeptic could say the Americans have the ability to listen to 150 countries and they would quite like that, but I can't prove it, and as far as I know, all of the encryption codes are locked in safes. But there must be a reason behind it, and I'm certainly not clever enough to find what it is. But I cannot believe that they will do this experiment or trial or epidemiological study knowing already people have died and carrying it on with the risk to the policewomen. They're not stupid, these government scientists. They must know what they're doing, and there must be a reason.
Ok, Okay, var det meg.
We have a lot of alternatives. For example, a 10-road from next station in England. That doesn't matter. I can explain what is the problem here in Norway. As the guy from Union told everybody here, if you try to be bad on TETRA, somebody try to stop you and you will lose your job. I have one example when I'm working with. We get a job from the police association here in Norway to install and send a report from the TETRA installed in the police car. And we sent them a report after this job and the invoice for the job, you know, so they pay me for you to make this job. And I explained to them and had a documentation that the TETRA in the police car, they have a very high level of radiation. I sent it to the police association. And after 2 weeks, this installation manual came from the police association, how you should install, take off the most important for the health. And say, we have get these instructions from the Motorola. So that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And I said, why? From the supplier. And you are the user.
I do know that I read an article, and it's either Switzerland or Sweden, somebody will correct me, that the chief of the police has also developed cancer, and he is blaming TETRA solely for his cancer. And I read that just a few days ago. Sweden or Switzerland, he's blaming TETRA for his cancer, and if he's got it, he cannot be the only one, and there must be others where it is slowly developing. There must be. Yes, sir.
Okay, jag tror Per Aslak som var
There is a great misunderstanding here. That is thinking that this company care for the people who are going to use it. That's completely wrong. They are not caring. Just after, in the end of the World War II, you have the atomic test in a Nevada desert, right. And they put their own soldiers in to try to what would be the effect of this. It was an experiment to see how many died, how many was destroyed in different countries. And this has continued all the way. In the United States, if you go into a doctor's office, he can take tests of you, and that is completely, you can't stop that. Every doctor can treat a person, woman or man, whenever they want, and that is within the legal system that they are. This was up in the Congress, and the person who raised this question, it was Armstrong, who was a Congress member, and it was rejected by the Congress. So they stated that this is possible, that any doctor can make experiment on anybody who wants. So that is, and this is the system.
You are right, sir, and I have been asked to talk about this, which will come into a little bit into my talk on Saturday, about government human experimentation, which are actually called black projects. I will be talking about that. I don't know if you're going to be there, sir, but I will be reading some government research on that on Saturday.
Okay, time is... we allow for 3 more questions. That's Tove, and then Per Eirik, and then Rafael. And then we finish the debate.
I'm not so good in English, but I try. You said that eye is very sensitive. This is not TETRA, but the same microwaves. I have for 6 years have a very illness on my eye. My pupils are growing fast, and I have almost going blind. And I go and have medicines for 6 years, strong medicines, because I not lose my. And then one day I took away my mobiles and the cordless phone at home. it was something I must do. And from the day I moved this from my head, my eye was okay.
Yeah, cordless phones, of course, transmit even when you put them down. They transmit day and night.
Yeah.
And if they're by your bed, it's incredibly dangerous because they're transmitting through your head all night.
Yeah.
But I will be discussing that when I discuss problems tomorrow or the next day.
But the interesting thing in Norway is that this is your imagination. It's nothing to do with the mobile phone.
Yes, they said, I go to my doctor and said, this is real problem, and I am a proof that the mobile phone is make my eye sick, and I have a damage on my eye forever.
Well, you have the ganglia cells in the side of the eye, and it's particularly dangerous when I come back to the lady police officer. In the embryo, the ganglia cells in the side of the eye, they're nothing to do with sight. They detect radiation, and they can affect other parts of the body. And you really don't want embryos, the new ganglia cells, detecting the radiation. But I don't know, maybe I can probably only think of one person in the world that would know. Whether they are still making your eyes go like that, I'm desperately trying to think of the lady's name, who's a fellow of the Royal Society, and if I can, I'll get the name to you. But there is a lady that has written a few papers on this, and it may be advantageous if you get a copy later on of my eye, the researchers who've looked into radiation in the eye. But you are correct, the eye is moist, it does have special cells that pick up radiation and react to radiation, and along with bone marrow, it's a part of the body which you really don't want to microwave.
Yeah, I know.
I know. Okay, Per-Erik.
Yes, thank you. I work for the Norwegian Post and Telecommunications Authority, and I have one comment and one question. First of all, I have to say I'm actually a bit shocked that you can suggest that the whole thing about TETRA is an experiment, and that somebody is really controlling this. I'm sorry, I don't understand it. This is
I'm using their words. It
Yes.
is an epidemiological study.
Yes, I don't have any further comments to that. This is not what I understand. But, a specific question. We do a lot of measurements of different services around Norway. We measure GSM, mobile phones, and also TETRA base stations.
Right.
And you said something that makes me a bit puzzled. And
Okay.
you said that the TETRA transmitters have incredible much power.
They can
what do you think about that?
they can. I would have to check my figures, but I know that some of the TETRA transmitters that we have in the UK, they have a range of up to 50 kilometres, whereas the ordinary cell phone is, what, 5 kilometres, 2 to 5 kilometres, cell phone tower.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is
Yeah.
because we have had FM radio around for, let's say, 60, 70 years. And what I call a powerful transmitter is either a radar with the megawatts, or you have an FM station about 80 kilowatts, 80,000 watts. As far as I know from TETRA, they are about 40 to 50 watts, the base station. And I'm just, that makes me...
The big difference is that the FM antennas are on top of the mountains, while you put the TETRA antennas on top of the roof of the house.
Yeah, I know, and that's the dangerous about saying that it has incredibly powerful transmitters, because they are not incredibly powerful compared to many other transmitters.
Maximum 25 watts.
Yes.
Maximum.
Well, 25 watts.
Now it's maximum.
Yes.
But in Norway you have rules for, in the test period, we are now using its 10. They tested for 10, but they explain that you have to put more sites total size in Norway, it's approximately 2,000. But the experience they have now, maybe you have to double it.
Okay.
Because of the
But to reach 50 kilometers with a pulse signal and all of the side lobes and things, it's quite a lot of power.
Well, my point was
Yeah.
just to point out, I don't like when we use words that are not
Okay, okay.
But it depends where you have the
Yeah.
power. It depends on if it's kilometers away from people or the neighbor, because 25 watts is it's a high value
Yeah. Well,
because
I mean,
close to the people, whilst you have an antenna on the top of the mountain kilometers away.
But one question, please. Is that average or is it peak you are talking about?
there are 13, as a gentleman will know, there are 13 different mathematical ways of calculating. You can have peak to peak, time average, you can,
I know that.
there are
but-
13 different ways.
But when he mentioned radars here,
Yeah.
then you're always talking about peak, and that is
Yeah.
the worst thing, in fact. But the average would be much less.
But there is research that shows that people near radar stations are sick, and also FM radio. A big study was carried out by Dr. Debbie Eklund in the UK around 3 of the ordinary FM radio transmitters, and they found a link between distance from transmitter and cancers and illnesses as you get nearer. The research has been done. They may be further away and on hills, but they can still cause the same illnesses.
But it's
But, I'm sorry,
much
can I just
more
come back?
difficult
Yes.
to see it's also much more difficult to understand the connection with the FM antenna kilometers away and the illness.
If I can just come back to the gentleman where you're talking 25 watts. We know that 1 microwatt can cause illness. 1 millionth of 1 watt can cause illness. And you're going to 25 watts. Now, again, and I'll accept I'm wrong if I'm saying the word more powerful, but to me, when 1 microwatt, and we're only looking, I'm trying to think what my brain's going, what the Bioinitiative report is. I think it's indoors, I think is it 2 microwatts? But when you're going up to 25 watts, to me, that is quite a lot of power for a person to be having if your bedroom window is sort of 500 meters from the transmitter. That's all. We're used to dealing with illnesses in the point something or 1 microwatts.
Okay, Rafael, last.